would you say about a handful of threats then made from foreign adversaries, less than 10, less than 5?
I would say less than 10 for
Okay.
sure.
Um, Now, the GOP has preemptively filed voting related lawsuits. What do you think the ripple effect will be after the election is over?
Well, I assume we're going to see additional election litigation. But I will say this, I mean, we saw dozens and dozens of those lawsuits in 2020 in an effort to undermine the will of the people in Michigan, and none of them were successful, all the way up to the United States Supreme Court. You might remember that the Attorney General of Texas tried to invalidate our votes here in Michigan and in three other swing states, and it didn't work. So what I would say is that through the 2020 process, what we know from that experience is that our uh, our elections are incredibly safe, secure, and most of all, they are accurate. And you can remember, for instance, all the allegations that were made in regard to Antrim County. So they did a hand recount, and it matched the results that they had in that county. There was an initial error that was quickly corrected, and then the same result that from the tabulators ended up being the same as the hand recount. And of course, we had, in addition to all the litigation that we had over 250 audits of the 2020 election to verify the results from all around the state. As well as an investigation by the then Republican members of the Michigan Senate that found that there was virtually no fraud of any kind in the election, and certainly not enough to have affected any of the elections that took place then. So I think people should feel more comfortable than ever. It's unfortunate that we have misinformation and disinformation that is being circulated about our elections, but you can talk to any local clerk, you can talk to any county clerk, and they'll tell you about the processes. And the thing is, the more that you know about the way our elections work, the more you'll feel confident in those processes.
You mentioned recounts, and your office has declined Secretary Benson's request for legal opinion on new election recount rules. So, what happens then if a recount is asked for by a candidate?
Okay, I think it's really important to be specific about what was asked
Okay.
and what our response is. We were asked for a formal Attorney General opinion. That's not just regular legal advice. Those are opinions that are issued by me, by the Attorney General, after a very lengthy process. We have something called an opinions review board at our department. It's a very lengthy process when we issue one of those. And we did not feel as though we were going to have time to do one of those official opinions, but we're still going to render legal advice. And in the event that there are requests for a recount, and the Secretary of State or the Michigan Department of State or the Bureau of Elections, all of whom we represent, seeks our advice, of course, we're going to render legal advice to them to the best of our ability. I will say that we have some issues, candidly, because many laws have changed. And so there are some laws that seemingly are a bit in conflict with each other, or that don't properly reflect the new technology that we're now using. But it doesn't mean that we can't still perform a recount. And it doesn't mean that we're not going to be providing advice to the Secretary of State should she request it. It just means we're not doing a formal legal opinion that is automatically binding on all state agencies.
Given the amount of time, correct? There just wasn't enough
Right.
time. Yeah.
There was not enough time to do a formal opinion between the time that we were asked and the election.
Have there been any additional reports of non citizens attempting to register to vote or to vote today?
No, there have not. And I think it's important that your viewers understand what a very unusual set of circumstances that was. And while I'm not handling the case personally, we do have an ongoing investigation, but I don't know if that was an effort to test the system or an effort to sort of sow a little bit of anarchy. But what we know is this: the issue of non-citizens voted has been investigated over and over and over again. And what we have found, and what everyone who's investigated this matter has found, is that it happens incredibly rarely, right? So there are so many penalties that are associated with a non-citizen voting. It's not just the threat of jail or prison. You're going to get deported if you are convicted, and you're never going to be allowed back in the United States. That's pretty significant. If you are an undocumented person, the authorities are going to find out who you are and where you are. And if you are documented and you have, say, a green card or a work visa or something, that's going to be revoked. So the penalties are so significant that people just don't do it. It happens so infrequently that, let me, direct your attention to the voter fraud commission that Donald Trump put together back in 2017. It operated for about a year. Mike Pence was the head of it. And then they ultimately ended up, dismantling this commission because they couldn't find enough voter fraud. And when it came to non-citizens voting, whether it was that investigation, whether it was the Heritage Foundation that's looked back about 40 years of elections in all our states, or whether it was the attorneys general that also performed this type of investigation in their states and went back several decades, they could only come up with really a handful of instances that this had occurred over the course of many, many decades in all 50 states. So that's how rare it was that it actually occurred. Obviously, we'll be on the lookout for it should anyone try to do that again. But the fact of the matter is, it was a very unusual set of circumstances. And as Attorney General, I've now been Attorney General for just about 6 years. We've only actually had one of these cases, and it was a Canadian woman who voted improperly in 2018. And that's the only case that we've seen up until this incident in Ann Arbor. So people should know, their votes are not being diluted by non-citizens voting because it virtually never occurs.
You talked about threats from abroad, but if there's any threats here domestically of political violence, and if it were to take place in Michigan following the election results, is there a plan in place?
Yeah, I mean, again, we've been working with law enforcement at all levels to ensure that there is not any kind of violence. And if there is anything that starts up, that it's addressed as quickly as possible. And, again, we have agents all across the state. We have lawyers all across the state. Same thing with the state police. Same thing with the federal authorities. We are prepared in the event that anyone tries to undermine the election by violating the law. And we are prepared in the event that somebody responds to it in an illegal manner. As Attorney General, it's not my job to pick winners or losers, right? I don't get to decide who gets elected to any office. It is the voters who make that decision. But it is my job to make sure that people follow the law and that the will of the voters is heard and defended. And that's what we're going to do during the course of this election.
And my last question, Attorney General, we had some audio issues right from the get-go. If you could just repeat the threats that you've received from foreign adversaries overseas and repeat that information for me, that'd be great.
Sure. Yeah, we've received some threats of violence that have come in on a handful of occasions that involve, threats at polling locations. We suspect, actually, we've confirmed in some instances that these are coming in from Russia. They are not credible. There are no actual legitimate threats, but this is an effort for our foreign adversaries to try to deter people from voting and to try to undermine people's confidence in the electoral process.
And you said these threats are made through social media, and they're threatening bombs, mass shootings, and what else did you say?
Those are the two that I'm familiar with.
Spreading misinformation.
Right, and spreading misinformation as well about people trying to undermine our election, elected officials trying to undermine our election. That's another thing that we've seen. And again, we've determined that it's coming from Russia.
Okay, no credible sources. None in West Michigan, mainly in the mid-Michigan and southeast Michigan is what you said, in less than 10 cases. Okay, just want to make sure I got my information correct. Anything more you'd like to add about what's taking place today and what's going through your heart and your mind as election day is halfway over now?
Right. Well, I'm super excited because it looks like we're potentially going to have record turnout in the state of Michigan. And the more people that participate, the stronger our democracy is. So, for those of you who are eligible voters but haven't cast your ballot yet, I urge you to get to your polling location. If you haven't registered, to go to your local clerk's office and to have your voice heard. And we want to assure everybody that we absolutely intend to keep a careful watch on how things are proceeding, and we will of course, ensure that the laws are properly followed, and that the laws are properly enforced. But at the end of the day, we're very excited to see the outcome of all the many elections that are taking place in Michigan, and to make sure that we are defending the will of the voters.
You said potential record turnout. Would that be for a general election?
Well, it'll be a general election, but probably for
every
everything,
election?
right? Because for every election, right? Because I was looking at the numbers on this. It was quite some time back. I think 72% came out in an election many years ago. I don't have all the stats, but I know our Secretary of State said that that's what she was anticipating.
More than 72% then?
Yeah, I mean, check me on that. I was
Sure.
off of what I saw her posting.
Either
But
way, that's exciting news for
yeah,
sure.
very exciting.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, you take care.